Well, welcome to our time together. Thanks so much for being here with me today. This is a great opportunity to share some wonderful things with you all. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I want to start with a poem. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod. All is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning, at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods, with warm breast and with, bright wings. Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote this poem called God's Grandeur. And what I love about it is that it has a rhythm, a kind of narrative shape that I think imitates salvation history. And I think it imitates actually the history of work. It imitates what was once upon a time, what's happened to work, and the possibility of redeeming work. I want to focus just for a moment again on the middle of that poem, where Hopkins says, generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. What's he getting at here? Well, part of what he's getting at is that work is tough, and the world doesn't seem to shine the way it did. It seems like you can't see God in the world anymore because there's been so much humanity covering it up with his smear, his toil. It's an interesting image, isn't it? He goes on to say, not only is that the fact, but man can't even feel because his foot is shod. We've lost a direct connection to what once was. We've lost a connection to God's goodness in creation. What's going on with this? Do we feel this way anymore? I don't know. I think maybe we do. I'm going to run a couple numbers past you to let you see what you think. So if you go out and ask teenagers, 13 to 18-year-old folks in high school, what their dream job is, you're going to get a majority of them, 52% at least, who tell you their dream job is to be an influencer, social media influencer. Now that's an interesting world we live in, where that's the dream job. What does it have to do with Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem? I don't know, I kind of think it has everything to do with the poem. What we see here in the middle of the poem is a reflection on the deadness, or at least the seeming deadness of work. That everything man does to the world and in the world simply obscures the goodness of God within it. Our work is disordered. Our work is destructive. Our work is It's wrecking the world, it's wrecking ourselves. It doesn't seem to have any reward to it. It doesn't seem to bring out the sharpness, the contrast, the brightness of God and His glory. People don't like to work. So what does that have to do with being an influencer? Well, when you ask people why they want to be an influencer, they say a few things. They say it gives them independence, and more importantly, it allows them to be creative and self-expressive. So essentially, what's an influencer? It's a person who gets paid to do the thing they wanted to do anyway, and to tell people about the thing they wanted to do anyway, and have others do the thing that they want to do and affirm them for doing whatever it is they feel like they want to do. Right? So influencers express themselves through media and get affirmation back by likes and by advertisement revenue. And so what they're doing is impressing their own identity out into the world and getting affirmation back for it. And this seems like a really attractive thing. They can do it on their own time. They can be who they are, free to be who they are, and free to share that goodness and glory out with the world and get affirmation back for it. And they never have to pick up a hammer to do it. They never have to drip a drop of sweat to do it. So people want, they're flocking to be influencers. At the same time, people are running from the trades, fleeing the trades, running. The number of people retiring is vastly outnumbering the people entering the trades. For example, within the next 10 years, we're going to need at least 380,000 jobs in construction trades alone from growth. And then from retirement, we're going to need another 300,000 jobs. So there's a huge growth in that trade, and there's a ton of people retiring, and people aren't entering that workforce. In fact, men are leaving the workforce at an astonishing rate. Something is going on in our world. Perhaps it's bleared. It's smeared with toil. Perhaps it wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. And the soil is bare now. We look out at the world of the tangible goods, of the trades, and we don't see one that imitates God's goodness. We see one that's full of toil. We look at the digital world, the world of infinite possibilities, and we see creativity. We look at the soil, we look at building, we see drudgery. We look at the computer, and we see life. I hope this strikes you as being as crazy as I find it. What do we do about this world? Is it even right? Well, we might think about that for a minute. Let's think about that. What is work actually supposed to be good? Well, if you look at Genesis 3, we all know, right? God says in Genesis 3, I will now bring up thorns and thistles for you, Adam, and in the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread. He says something very similar to the wife, right? In pain you shall deliver children. I will multiply your pains. Okay, so is God telling us that work is supposed to be terrible? Well, on the one hand, yes, it's supposed to be punitive. But what's it supposed to remind us of? What's the punishment about? Now, punishment is the removal of a good so that we can see that we have a disordered value in our lives, that we've preferred the wrong good. And so what is the punitive element of work? Well, I think what it's trying to tell us is that when we're working and we encounter the toil, we encounter the setbacks, we encounter them that way because we have the wrong desire for the kind of thing we want in work. Let's go back to the influencer versus the carpenter to help understand this. The influencer wants infinite power of creativity and self-expression that will always and everywhere be affirmed back to them as good. They're going to get 10 billion likes and no thumbs downs on their website. So, in other words, they want to be like God. They want to be God in the first 6 days of creation, who sets forth everything. And at the end of it, he says, it is good, it is good, it is good. And on the 6th day, it is very good. And there is no one there to tell him otherwise. That's what we want. We want the total power to be the absolute creator and be affirmed for it. Let's talk about the carpenter. Well, now here's the carpenter. He's going to have to build something from a set of plans that he didn't draw up. He's going to have to work on ground to pour a foundation that may or may not really like his plans for the foundation. Maybe it's sandy. Maybe it's clay. Maybe it's rocky. He's going to have to build walls and perhaps rebuild them if they aren't plumb. Right? There's setback after setback after potential setback. There's all kinds of things telling him, no, wrong, you didn't do it right. His creativity is limited by the constraints of the project, by the constraints of the world around him. The digital creativity, on the other hand, of the influencer, boundless, limitless. So we can see why a person would think, well, the most creative thing I could do would be to be the influencer. Being a carpenter, it's somewhat creative, but less creative. And so we see that people are going to flee from that. They're going to flee from a creativity that seems limited to them. But at the end of the day, I'd want to argue that there's a kind of disorder in that. Right? What does God tell us in the garden? He says to Adam, you can pick from any of the fruits you want. Any of them. Go for it. Do whatever you please. But the one fruit in the middle of the garden, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, don't touch it, lest you die. Well, what does that have to do with limitless versus limited creativity? Well, let's think about what's really going on there. What does the knowledge of good and evil mean? Does it just mean that until he touched that tree, Adam, there was a piece of information he didn't know? I wonder what goodness is. No. He understood the difference between goodness and evil. So it wasn't somehow a lack of understanding about what goodness is. The serpent, let's go to the serpent to help figure this out. The serpent tells Adam, see, here's what's going to happen to you. God doesn't want you to be like him. He knows that if you eat that fruit, you'll be like him. He doesn't want that because he wants to save that power for himself. What power is this? Ultimately, it's the power to know, that is, in this sense, to decide what makes good and evil. Not to recognize it, not to discover it, but to decide it, to determine it. In other words, to have ultimate moral creativity. Right? Ultimate creativity. What I say goes. Everywhere, in everything. No limits on me. And Satan suggests to us that God doesn't want us to have that because it would be a good thing for us, and God doesn't want good things for us. He wants to keep us under his thumb. So Adam takes that apple. He says, I am the master of what's right and wrong. I will decide what's right and wrong. And so now I have ultimate creativity. And so again, here we are back to the influencer and the carpenter. The carpenter has a limitation on his creativity, on his power. The influencer says, no, there is no creativity. The digital world, virtual world, says you can be and do anything. The concrete, tangible world of nails and pine boards limits you. But maybe it's not so bad to be limited. Maybe we were created to have a kind of limitation. What do I mean there? Well, I mean, if you look back to Genesis 1 and 2, you find that God's mission for us involves us imitating God, not being God. And so what does God tell us to do? He says, fill the earth and be fruitful and multiply, have dominion over the fishes that pass through the paths of the sea, have dominion over the birds of the air, have dominion of all things that creep and crawl upon the earth. So we have dominion, we imitate God, but how does God have dominion? What does he do? Well, let's look at the first days of creation again. God brings something into being, he orders it, he fills it. Brings something into being, orders it, fills it. Let's look at that. First thing God does, I create light, separate it from darkness, I call it light, night and day and night. So each day has a kind of bringing into being, ordering, and then filling. And then furthermore, the whole structure of the 6 days, the first 3 days creates realms, the second 3 days creates rulers. And so God is a wise creator, and we're invited into that wisdom. So what we do when we work, if we want to redeem our work and make it worthwhile, properly within the limitations, we need to see it as a participation in the wisdom of God's ordering. The wisdom of God's ordering of the creation. So when I make a house, I'm participating in the rational organization of a structure for a wonderful purpose of giving shelter to someone. Is that what I'm doing when I create content as an influencer? Maybe. But it doesn't feel quite the same, does it? It feels like I'm just putting myself out there and saying to you, like me. Versus building a house, I'm putting something ostensibly good out there that's participating in the creation of the world. Now, the other thing God does, he doesn't just order and fill, he gives himself to something and brings life. And that, I think, is the second piece we need to think about for redeeming our work. That work, according to God and according to St. Pope John Paul II in his letter on work, gets its value primarily from the fact that only a human can do it, because only a human can give himself as a free and loving gift to the world, to God, and to another person. So in our work, we participate in the wisdom of God, and we participate in the love that God is by doing our work as a free gift, not free in the sense of not remunerated, but free in the sense of I've decided to give myself over to this for the good of the other. And that's part of the beauty of work. Now, the final piece to help us redeem work is to see how it's contextualized within our final purpose, which is not the 6th day of creation, but the 7th day. The 7th day is rest. And here I don't just mean the world's rest, where let's take a break so I can be a better worker on Monday. No, I mean the rest of being content in the presence of the good. Being content in the presence of the good. That's what God did on the 7th day. He invites us into that in our own lives. So we have to put work in its place. The purpose of work is to create the context and possibility of leisure. And what's the truest leisure? It's to live the 7th day. For us now as Christians, the 8th day is to live in a life of worship, of contemplation of God, of liturgy. And so we set aside that time, and all of our work points to the worship and liturgy of the Lord's Day. And so here we are. We've talked about some of the paradox of work's disorder in the world, how we feel it and taste it and see it, how we know it in ourselves. And we've only pointed, mind you, at some of the ways to redeem work. And I hope you can join me in trying to redeem work in your own lives as I try to redeem it for us and our students at San Damiano College for the Trades. Thank you.